Good evening, everybody, and welcome to FASD Hub Scotland's March Wednesday webinar. I am Barbara Ogston. I'm FASD lead at the Hub, as unfortunately Ali Brown, our project manager, is unable to be with us this evening. So I'll be hosting tonight's event, and we are delighted to be joined by Miranda Eodanable. I always trip up on that. Apologies,
All
Miranda.
right, just Miranda's fine.
It's Miranda. Miranda is a friend of the Hub, and you may have seen her pop up at other events, and she's also helped produce some of our education resources. So we're delighted that she's come along this evening to talk about her own interest in the field of FASD, and in particular her PhD research with the University of Edinburgh. So following on from last month's webinar, which was with Partners in Advocacy, who are our advocacy project, and in keeping with our theme for this year, which is #FASDHearMe, we at the Hub think it's really important that the lived experience of individuals with FASD and their families is paramount when talking about their lives and talking about the condition. So we're delighted that Miranda's come along this evening to talk about her lived experience research, and I'm sure you'll find her work to be really interesting and thought-provoking. So Miranda's going to give a presentation about her research, and afterwards there'll be an opportunity for questions. We do have some questions that were submitted when people booked. However, you're also very welcome to pop any questions you have into the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of your screen. And we hope to be able to pose those to Miranda later on. Just before we begin, just to give you a little idea about the topics that Miranda can cover. Miranda is not a medical doctor, and although very experienced and knowledgeable in FASD, she's not able to speak directly around issues around diagnosis, talking sort of in detail about that, although she's very happy to share her own insight into the impact of the diagnosis and her professional experience with FASD and as an educational psychologist as well. So if you do have any questions regarding the diagnostic process that we're not able to answer this evening, we will try to signpost you to other resources where you might be able to get those questions answered. So to get us started, I'm going to pass over to Miranda, who will say a little more in the way of introduction and share with us some of this very exciting research that she's been involved in. Thank you very much, Miranda.
Not at all. Thank you, Barbara, and thank you very much for having me on tonight. Now, I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Okay, right, and you can let me know, guys, if that's okay. Barbara, is that okay, Simon?
Perfect.
Perfect, right. So, just as Barbara is saying, tonight's topic is looking at the impact and the value of the FASD diagnosis. And basically, I am pursuing a PhD study at the moment, and I'm really interested in exploring young people's experiences, their lived experiences, their views of the FASD diagnosis, and professional views as well. Okay. Now, you kind of wonder, how did I get to this point in my career, in my journey with FASD? So I thought I'd give you a little bit of background about myself. I have quite substantial kind of professional and academic experience, but I do not have lived experience in terms of being a caregiver regarding FASD. So I think that's really important just to state that and to be aware of that when I'm talking about research as well. So as Barbara had mentioned, I'm actually an educational psychologist for a local Scottish authority. And in post, I was approached by one of the managers to kind of get involved with FASD in terms of development work. As part of that, I was then, I attended the Scottish Government Manitoba training that was on, I think, about 2015. As a result of that, I then actually was involved in an NHS FASD project where we assessed a number of young people for FASD diagnosis, just to look, and this was post the kind of fine guidelines that are in Scotland, and that looks at how you would diagnose young people over time. So that was a kind of brief pilot that I was involved in. As part of that, I also have kind of supports with the Scottish Government, and around that, I organised with a colleague a National Conference for Educational Psychologists on FASD awareness. As I was moving through this journey, I mean, I got to know lots of fantastic colleagues who are involved in FAST, which is the Fetal Alcohol Advisory Support Team in Scotland, and those who worked for NHS Arran and Ayrshire. And I was just really enthused by their work. And I think I had lots of questions that I was coming across in terms of my own interest, and that really led me to pursue kind of applying for a PhD by research at Edinburgh University. So, and as I said, a friend of the hub. Thank you very much, Barbara. That's a lovely compliment, a lovely statement to have. And yes, I do collaborate quite a bit with FASD Hub, and that's really again kind of acknowledging the importance of I think co-production and participation with those who do have lived experience and those who have substantial kind of academic knowledge as well. So that's a little bit about my background. Now, when I kind of first kind of considered the topic of FASD diagnosis, I did lots and lots of reading around these terms. And there was three main terms I felt that I came across quite regularly. Stigma, that's the most kind of, I think, dominant, most common phrase that we hear around the topic of FASD diagnosis. The other construct kind of involves the impact of the diagnosis. You know, what's the outcomes when you have a diagnosis? Does it lead to post-diagnostic support? And then the value. Now, the value seems to occur more frequently for those who actually have the lived experience. So those who are actually diagnosed themselves and those who are caregivers as well. And using the construct of FASD diagnosis as a really helpful, I suppose, concept for kind of those who have lived experience and professionals for me to explore their views, their experiences, and their attitudes towards FASD as well. So in terms of impact and value, what I probably noted most significantly was that the impact of FASD, when that's kind of available in research, it tends to discuss the impact on education, that those kind of the profile that you see of young people who are diagnosed, it has kind of poor mental health well-being outcomes. The transition into adulthood can be really difficult for some young people. So the impact tends to be probably quite negatively skewed, and sometimes that's reinforced in the stigma research as well, because it has very kind of negative and kind of stereotypes by the public about young people's outcomes. In terms of the word value in the construct, what we see kind of really significantly is that parents have a very high value attached to the FASD diagnosis. In particular, it offers them that kind of clarity around their child's needs, and an ability to advocate very clearly with the systems that they meet as parents. So that would be systems like education, health, social work, sometimes justice as well. Sometimes parents say that actually the diagnosis helps them in terms of being parents to then kind of, I suppose, educate others and to provide other family members, other professionals, an understanding of what FASD means for the young person and how it has an impact on them. In terms of young people, the research can be quite limited about what they say in terms of their experience and the value that they attribute to a diagnosis. The earlier kind of research in Canada looked at, well, interviewed children and young people aged 8 to 22 who had FASD, and there was a very clear acknowledgement from the young people that they did feel different, that it helped to understand their disability. They were very clear that they felt supported by parents, and I suppose the diagnosis itself helped them to make adjustments to their life. Now, this is also replicated in a very recent study by Valerie Temple in 2021, where adults who are diagnosed later on in life said it really helped their self-understanding and their adaptation to kind of everyday circumstances. And it definitely had a significant benefit in terms of accessing financial support or any other supports that they needed at the time. However, though, because there's very little research, there tends to be quite, I suppose, a gap then in terms of kind of the impact of this, kind of for professionals and why professionals would take this forward. So if I move on, this is the kind of, I suppose, the kind of dominant feature of the FASD diagnosis when we talk about stigma. So here we see some kind of typical images. You know, we have the pregnant mother, down at the bottom we've got young people, and we've got the caregiver with their young child. Now, what I have here, I suppose what we see in literature really tells us that that the stigma of FSD tends to be loaded towards this group over here. Okay, so we have a lot of kind of negative public stereotypes about biological mothers, the kind of responsibility and blame sometimes loaded to them. In terms of young people, there can be a perception of very negative, very negative outcomes in terms of their kind of well-being, their future, and what they can achieve as well. Um, and lastly, a lot of, I suppose, parents, caregivers, and young people themselves they actually feel the experiences of stigma, being stigmatized by others. Now, this clearly then has an impact from what we know in terms of kind of surveys with health professionals, educational professionals as well, that there's a very clear impact in terms of diagnostic practice. There can be an impact in terms of attitudes and then behavior as well that can guide these issues. Now, the stigma of professionals, I suppose what we've had in kind of UK research is what's been labelled as a stigmatizing. They believe that FASD could be a stigmatizing diagnosis. And I think what researchers tend to say that this leads to professional hesitation to diagnose. But this is not a criticism of professionals in any sense, because we're really aware that professionals operate within very large systems of health, education, justice and social care as well. Okay, so this is just a bit of a background really about the kind of literature, and this kind of leads me on my journey to explain what I'm going to do or what I've started to do in my research. So here we see just a kind of a collection of the many factors that impact professionals, and in particular, I've cited health and education. So we know that there's a kind of a very low number of referrals for FASD. Now that can be impacted by lots of different things that are going on. Sometimes the pathways, whether it's neurodevelopmental or just a clear FASD diagnostic pathway, they can be really limited. So that can make it very difficult for professionals to actually even refer children. Sometimes we know that prenatal alcohol exposure is not always cited in a child's history. We know from research that knowledge and training is always a preference by professionals, and they're always seeking it. We know that there can be a kind of a stigmatizing view about the FASD diagnosis that's held, and there's lots of factors that contribute to that. Over time, we know that the diagnostic process has been quite tricky to kind of ensure that prenatal alcohol exposure has been disclosed, or that there's evidence of that, because that is obviously one of the criteria for that. And then again, for some professionals, they may have the view of, okay, we'll have a diagnosis, but if we don't have post-diagnostic support, what is that going to do for the child? The so what of providing a diagnosis? Okay, so that's some of the information that we have, but really when it comes to what do actually young people say? As I've said already, we've got really limited research out there about that. So There was a series of research by a Canadian researcher, Cheryl Duquette, in 1995 to 2013. It's just a kind of a range of professionals, a range of articles that were published, and it looked at the concept of a young person's experience, their adaptations, and their sense of belonging to their school environment. And it also looked at post-school transition. So what young people clearly said, um, relationships, so that would be the caring adults, the caring teachers in their lives, having access to appropriate services. Okay. Clearly, kind of advocacy and the support from parents was fundamental in terms of their well-being and to kind of support their access to services as well. Young people said that a diagnosis was very helpful, and also kind of proper, kind of appropriate and considered planning and transition into adulthood helped them as well. So, what did that actually mean in the school environment? So, young people had a very clear preference for smaller classes, um, kind of help with tasks and assignments. Now, that could be a kind of a whole variety of things in terms of strategies, in terms of providing very clear instructions, making sure the task is differentiated to the child's needs, making sure that the child is motivated by the task, um, making sure that the young person had a number of breaks in the day, and that could be movement breaks, in addition to just having the kind of normal kind of playtime breaks as we would have. And what we kind of always have essential to anything that young people say is that they really, really value the support from adults. Now, that can be support in terms of kind of academically or obviously socially and in terms of their well-being. From that research, as young people became older and they moved into kind of post-school placements, um, what they reflected as kind of supporting their transition was a kind of importance of developing their own self-advocacy, which was quite a tricky thing. So understanding FASD as a disability and being able to advocate for themselves when they kind of required. Very clearly, when they were moving on to kind of college and to different types of placements, they continued to need academic and social adjustments. That did not kind of disappear overnight. Um, Obviously, this support that was valued had to be couched in terms of the organisation, so the college's awareness of FASD. So did the staff actually understand FASD, or did they just keep giving assignments and not acknowledge the kind of level of support that a young person needed? Um, Again, sometimes kind of mental health comes up as an issue quite frequently for lots of young people, not just young people with FASD. Um, but I think it's being aware in terms of the organisation, parents, and young people themselves definitely identified the significance of being aware and actively managing their mental health, because that at times led to kind of reasons for kind of maybe dropping out of a planned transition or a placement as well. Now, what I'm starting to kind of refer to, and this is one of the kind of key kind of theories that I'm looking at in my PhD research, is all about disability identity. Now, I've covered topics like self-advocacy, but when I'm talking about self-advocacy, I'm really interested in how that young person understands themselves and their disability. Okay, and then how they're going to relate it, to other people, so how they kind of express it to other people and how they see themselves in relation to others. Okay, and then what kind of adjustments are required in their lives as well. um, One of the kind of theories that I'm really interested in is called disability identity development, and it's by a clinician and researcher in the States, Jennifer Gibson, and she constructed this, and I think in terms of individual awareness. Now, this is my diagram at the side, and it talks about a young person becoming aware of their differences, but not actively quite understanding what that means for them, being quite accepting of support. And then as they move into adolescence, what you might find for some young people is that awareness in comparison to peers, that it can vary in terms of responses. So some people don't really want to talk about it. Some people go through a period of questioning why it's happened, why they have this disability, and what it actually means in their lives, and the things that they actively need support with, and things that are not going to just fade away over time. And then you have a period of acceptance. And I think at that point, you see a lot more young people becoming quite clear in their advocacy for their own needs as well. Now, I know I've presented this as if it's a very fluid, kind of linear process, but obviously this can vary over time, and it can vary in relation to age, it can vary in relation to kind of family circumstances, the individual's um, kind of understanding of themselves. Lots of things can impact on this. So it's actually quite fluid. So you could do lots of arrows to and from each part of that box as well. But in terms of what we're really clear, though, is that in terms of kind of supporting a young person's disability identity development, that they really need very clear information about their disability. They need to be kind of involved in meetings over time that affects them, kind of appropriate to their age as well, and learning how to advocate for themselves. And obviously, information is that kind of first step towards it. Now, when we look at disability identity awareness in different settings, we actually see kind of a really encouraging view of how professionals can play a role in this. So, one of the authors in kind of biomedical literature talks about a professional being a critical source of anticipatory guidance. So, in that phase where a young person is receiving a diagnosis, it's not highlighting the things that they can't do necessarily, because there will be differences, but it's acknowledging their motivations, their strengths, and what kind of adjustments will support them as well. What authors also kind of, I suppose, recognize is that young people deserve a very clear explanation of what a diagnosis means, and that their emotions are valid around it, and that they need to be supported with questions as well. In terms of education, we have a little bit less information on that. But generally, in terms of disability identity awareness, I came across a really interesting author, Carolyn Muller, who herself is a researcher, and she has a disability. And one of her articles in 2019 is titled, "I Didn't Know That um, Young People Could Turn into Adults with Disability." Now, I'm paraphrasing that, but really it kind of highlighted that for her, and in her experiences and from her research, that there was a really clear gap for young people to understand their disability identity when they were in an educational environment where there was a clear kind of limited representation of disability in staff. The concept of disability was not recognised fully or explored fully in a curriculum, and where young people maybe didn't have access to others in the disability community as well. And the author herself interestingly stated that um, she felt that there was an ableist assumption that young people would kind of magically understand their disability without being given direct information or intervention as well by adults in their lives. So that leads me on to my current research. As Barbara said, I think the lived experience is crucial to understand what's going on for young people as well. So my research comprises 3 studies. And the first one is looking at the lived experiences of young people with FASD. And I've just finished my data collection for that. My second study is involving health professionals' views of FASD diagnosis. And then my last study will be looking at educational professionals' views and knowledge of FASD as well. moving on. Again, I think this is a really crucial part of my research, is making sure that adults with FASD and those with substantial professional experience can contribute to my research in terms of kind of co-production. So I have a PhD advisory board. So I have one of the lead psychologists from the fetal alcohol advisory and support team. I have the lovely Ali Brown, and Barbara obviously gives me support as well in terms of FASD Hub. Um, and then I've got a fantastic advocate as well, an adult with FASD who contributes to it, and I've got a consultant pediatrician from the NHS. So basically, I meet with this group when I have provided kind of an outline of my research, and they give me their advice on the research design and the tools I'm going to use for my data collection. You will see at the very end, I've got a link to my research on the FASD on the Adoption UK website as well, and they've been really supportive in terms of kind of supporting my recruitment process as well and sharing this information. So I'm going to tell you a bit about my first study. So I've just finished the data collection on that. So this is one of my slides from it. It was an online study. So I had hoped to do a study in person, but that obviously changed in times of COVID. And what I did, I had two groups. And one group I worked with over, I'm just trying to think, June of last year to around just the end of July. And then I had another group that I started working with in October. And then we kind of finished just a few weeks ago, just due to many, many factors of COVID, Christmas, all these other things. So I asked the young people who were aged 12 to 19, and I had two groups in that, and I had kind of a total of 8 young people that took part in my study. So I was delighted. And one of the wonderful things of doing an online study was that I was able to recruit across the UK. So that was wonderful. I had participants from Northern Ireland and from England and from Scotland as well. And I just had a fantastic experience working with them. They were amazing, and I was really grateful for their time, and to kind of to allow me to be part of that as well. So in terms of this, okay, so what did the study? It was actually a photo-based study, and the method is called Photovoice. So I'm just going to take you through what I did. I met with all the young people, kind of individually, to make sure that they were happy to be part of the research. I kind of gained their consent and told them all about the research. Then I had a group training session where I explained the kind of research aims, what we were planning to do, and I also supported their understanding of how to take photographs and how to ask for consent when taking photographs. And what I asked the young people to do then was to basically to be the photographers of their life for about 3 weeks. And I gave them 3 different topics, and it was a topic that could be about their life either at home or school or in the community. And they had to take the photos, they had to select them, and I had lots of fantastic parental support in making sure that the photos were returned to me as well. And from there, the young people had selected it. And on the bottom bit, you'll see then from my lovely images that we then did individual interviews. I did an individual interview with each person about their selection of photographs and, what those photographs meant to them. And, some of the kind of important messages from that as well. Once I had done all those individual interviews, I then met with the group again and we shared photographs as a whole. And we're at that process now at the very end of starting to think, right, how do we share these photographs with everybody? And I mean, the photographs are going to be anonymized, but there's lots of fantastic insights into that, about kind of, what young people really value in terms of the photos. So a lot of the kind of, I suppose, the initial photos that I'm seeing in the initial analysis is telling me that there's a real value towards family relationships, the kind of supports that they really value. So things like Xboxes, music, lots of devices that young people really valued in terms of helping them to relax and helping them to sometimes focus. Sometimes there were devices in terms of kind of initiating friendships as well. Pets were obviously quite important too. And I think really from what came from interviews as well was the sense that the school environment was where young people felt they needed the most strategies and support as well. Now, just moving on, I'm just going to show you some of the photos. Okay, it's just a very tiny selection of my photographs. So the young people involved were obviously, they took these photographs and then they selected the ones that were kind of really important to them. And the photographs were kind of around the topics of who and what is important to me. And again, it was across the context of either homeschool or community, but it was entirely up to the young person of what they wanted to choose, what or who helps me, and then challenges and how I deal with them. So I'll just talk a little bit about some of these photographs. So at the top, one of the young people had a place that they loved. I mean, outdoors, walking, nature, exercise was really important to the young person. And they had a place at the weekends that they really liked to visit. And that was a really kind of huge kind of theme for them in terms of their well-being and their kind of identity of who they were. Things that helped kind of young people, tablets, Xboxes, music devices, headphones, those sorts of devices. Some young people had an interest in makeup, kind of experimenting with looks, lots of different things there as well. And then challenges and how I deal with them. One young person talked about food and how important it was to them. They could get really hungry and they really like to enjoy their food. Sometimes kind of issue of maybe cutting things, but food was a very kind of central topic. I think for some of the boys anyway. And then nighttime could be sometimes an issue for some young people, so they kind of reflected on things that help them to get to sleep. And whether just so that the bedroom tended to be a very safe and calm place for them to relax as well. Okay, moving on. Now, that's me at the end of my presentation. As I was saying, I'm now into a phase of looking at how I'm going to share the photographs with the young people, and I'm going to be looking at obviously my data analysis, and I'm also planning my next study, which will be with health professionals. So I'm just going to stop my video just there. Right. Has my video gone now?
We did lose your video. Are you able to turn it on? Oh yeah, I think you're coming back.
I'm coming back.
Yeah, we were hoping you might reappear.
Oh, sorry, I didn't recognize, and I thought I'll just keep talking.
No, that is great. Thanks very much. That was absolutely fascinating. I was really particularly interested in what you're saying around the identity of disability. It's not something I've really thought of before, and I might have to pick your brains about that, because that's something I'm very conscious that my own young person is going through at the moment.
Yeah.
And it's just great to hear that the lived experience of these children, young people, that somebody's listening, and it doesn't matter what they say. It might not seem important to us, but it's important to your research, and in turn it'll be important to your findings.
Thank you. My camera seems, I'm like I seem to be going in and out. Apologies, but I'm still here. I will just make sure I've got everything closed down in case any programs are interfering with it. Okay, fingers crossed.
Oh no,
this always happens to me, doesn't it, Barbara? I don't know how many.
It's nothing to do with you. There wouldn't be a Zoom meeting or a Zoom webinar without there being some technical issues. It's fine, don't worry about it.
Yeah, definitely.
Just
Do you know
thinking
what?
Sorry, carry on.
Sorry, Barbara. No. Do you know what I was going to say? Actually, that is something. So, as part of my research, I did ask parents to fill in screening questionnaires and some background questionnaires. And actually, it's really interesting that you mentioned, oh, I'm thinking about this as the next step, because what I suppose my very initial and my early stages of analysis is telling me that when parents were discussing FASD with their children, that actually there was quite few instances of professionals providing that. Now that could be due to age as well, but parents were definitely the main source of information for young people, and that
Mm.
was from them, and that was parents reporting as well. So
Mhm.
parents were very clear advocates in terms of, they were self-researching, they were kind of looking at all the resources out there. So I think that's a really significant factor for me, because I think as professionals and in with my professional hat on, I'm always thinking, is there other support I can provide? Where do I go? What do I do? But we're really clear, I mean, even from this, that parents are saying we're doing a lot of this groundwork. It's not always so explicit or apparent about where we go or what we can do for it.
Yes, I think that's true. And I think there's a lot of good resources out there as well. If people would like to know more about how to speak to their child or young person about FASD, if you go onto our website, which is fasdhub.scot, you'll find a section there for parents and carers, and we've got quite a few resources on there, just about how to start that conversation and how to help your young person feel empowered and positive about FASD as well. But you're right, it's very much the parents take the lead and talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
Just thinking about your research, did you come across any sort of barriers? I know you've had to do this in the kind of virtual online world. How was that experience engaging young people with FASD?
Um, I actually had amazing conversations with young people. So I definitely think parents were amazing because they really facilitated the connection and the organization, because that's a huge thing that parents do anyway. But that really helped me in terms of kind of accessing young people. Um, I do think so. In my age group, I was looking for young people who were aged kind of 12 to 19. Um, and I ended up I had two groups, like I said, but I had to make it. I was originally going to start with just the Scottish population, and then I kind of ran into a very small number with that. So I extended it to the UK, to the rest of the UK, to make sure I kind of got I suppose a decent sample in terms of then, kind of for further down the line, because I mean, with kind of research, what we really want to do is not to keep this research just within the FASD community. We want to share it much more widely as well. Um, so in terms of my experience of talking to young people, they were amazing online stuff. Um, they, I mean, I think sometimes people talk about, oh, I don't know, again, stereotypes about, oh, I don't know in terms of attention, how are you going to manage that? But really, sometimes the interviews went on longer than I thought they were going to go on, but the young people were happy. They participated fully. If they wanted breaks, they took breaks. We had activities, and I did ask, the PhD advisory group to look through and give me their views about kind of what would work, what wouldn't work as well. I think I was really mindful of that. Um, but they were really excited to show their photographs. That was, and the level of detail, and that's why I chose a photo-based study, because I was conscious if I just did a talking interview and that was it, I could get lots of lovely information, but their selection and I'm trying to make sense of, what they're making sense of. So we had this, I suppose the photos really helped to give a much wider experience. So not just their thought of FASD, but actually what it felt like to have FASD sometimes and what they thought about it and their emotions about it. So that really helped pull it out.
And you're saying there that it's really important that your findings aren't just kept within the FASD community. Have you had any thoughts about how you're going to share your findings with the world?
With the world. Well, I mean, there's kind of, I suppose, two things I think of right now. Um, first is obviously with FASD community in itself. So I know you guys, FASD Hub, have kindly said that you will kind of share the photos once the group, and I know FASD Northern Ireland as well is happy to host our photographs as well. So thank you very much. So that just gives a sense of, what young people kind of share, what their messages are, what that's about. But then kind of academically, I'm kind of wanting to, where there's kind of a conferences I can attend, I'll do presentations, and then hopefully down the line, publish articles as well.
Okay. And so looking to the future, what would you like the impact of your research to be? What's your aspiration for all your years and years and years of work?
I would really like for it to be recognized that there's quite a wide range of perspectives that are involved in FASD diagnosis, that young people have a very clear voice, because I think the Scottish sign guidelines were fantastic, because I think they really recognized, the parental value towards an FASD diagnosis, and that parents had a very clear voice about it. But that was a huge factor for me, and a driver for this was that I didn't see it coming from young people. And then when we're talking with health professionals, with educational professionals in my practice and within research, I wanted to explore more of their views, because the research tends to be just surveys, and I think surveys only give us very small kind of picture of a situation. But I really wanted to understand their, maybe do they have kind of personal views, maybe they don't. And I'm not looking for my next study, I'm not looking for people who have vast range of experience. It's, regardless of experience, just having some experience of young people who've got prenatal alcohol exposure, what does that look like? And working in that context, do they experience barriers, facilitators that will really kind of help a diagnosis? So I think it's just making sure that we get a range of views, because I think it all has an impact, because obviously the child and the parent, they don't just stay at home. They have to access all these different services. Services have to interact with them. So I'm hoping that it'll have an impact in that way.
Okay. And you'd mentioned about professionals being involved in your research as well. Do you want to speak a wee bit about that, and what you're hoping to gain from speaking to professionals?
Okay, so my next study, which is currently going through the ethics procedure at Edinburgh University, is basically, so my second study is specifically planning to do, interviews with health professionals. And it's going to look, really explore their views and their experiences of the kind of FASD assessment, wherever they work, and then their views about kind of, I suppose, the reporting aspect of FASD. So if they are telling somebody about an FASD diagnosis, do they think that helps the young person? How would they deliver that news? And just relating it to the development to see if it has some kind of bearing on kind of, developing the young person's sense of disability identity, and how they can potentially have an impact on that as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so my very last study is going to be with educational professionals. Now that's the area that probably has the kind of, in terms of professional groups, is quite a very small kind of evidence base regarding that. So within that, I'm really just wanting to know their kind of views of FASD, what they understand are the child's needs, and what kind of supports they might provide in terms of the educational environment. But that's going to come later on. So I'm hoping to finish really my data analysis and looking at kind of how I'm going to share the findings of my first study this year, and I'm going to be starting the second study as well this year. So they're kind of all running into each other with it.
Yeah, we wish you all the best with that. It sounds absolutely fascinating. I can't wait to see all the results from it. We've had a question come in asking, were all your participants living at home with parents and carers, or were any in a residential school environment when you were working with the children and young people? They're interested just in terms of where people might need more structure, might need more support, or if things are the things at home were more or less formally structured than the residential special school. So did you have any mix within the group?
It was predominantly, so I had predominantly adoptive parents and foster carers as well. I had one birth parent, and I had one person who did change placement at one point within it, but everybody lived at home. Everybody lived within a family kind of a structure at home. And I think from what I recall, all young people attended a mainstream environment, but definitely received additional support. So they accessed it from either like a kind of hub concept within a mainstream environment, or they attended mainstream classes with lots of kind of additional support in place.
And there's a similar question as well, asking if any of the young people had any other needs or disabilities.
Yeah, so there was one or two individuals who had co-occurring diagnoses of, it was things like ADHD, ASD, anxiety, kind of related issues around kind of mental health as well. But ADHD was probably, I think that was about 2 out of the young people. Sorry, I'm in the process of trying to look at all that information at the same time, so I'm starting on that. So that's what I'm thinking about at the moment.
We've got there's a couple of other comments I'm just looking at in the chat here as well. People just talking about their experiences of talking to the young person or about FASD. And yeah, just other comments about how interesting it is to see about the disabled identity information as well. I'm going to just turn some of the questions that people submitted before tonight's event, and this is a huge big area. But what do you feel the kind of the benefits and the value would be for an individual to receive a diagnosis? A lot of people talk around, should we be labelling children? Is a diagnosis worth it in the end? What's your kind of professional experience or academic experience on that?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I can draw on both, because what I suppose young people but I'll just maybe actually just kind of start with the study itself. What I probably encountered from young people was that at the kind of younger age, as you would expect, they had an awareness. They weren't always very keen to share it with other people. So for some young people, it wasn't anybody else's business. Very clear about that. And as they started to get a little bit older, and it tended to be the kind of later years of secondary school, they clearly were able to identify the supports that they needed. They weren't always very comfortable about asking, so that's where maybe parents came in. But then as they turned into that kind of tipping into kind of 17, 18, 19, a really clear assertive voice started to appear in terms of, I know what I need, I really need this. And I think, and they say themselves, FASD is really, the diagnosis has really helped me understand myself, and that, this is going to be a lifelong thing. And they were using phrases like, I realize that, I've got FASD, and, that there's other people out there, I'm not alone. With some of the kind of words that were being used, I've learned to accept myself. So really, really, I think really important concepts that I think are really important to share with others. That it can be quite, for some young people, not everybody, it can be a bit of an isolating experience in terms of going to school and looking at other peers, and maybe that perception that they don't have issues, or that's it's not it's not an issue. And it was really, I suppose, as a researcher listening to the words, some people said, I'm not a weirdo. Now that was really, as a human being in itself, just, of course you're not, wow. But I think that's how they were feeling, quite isolated. And, I don't understand always what's going on. But as they had more information, and as they got a bit older, you saw the difference in the older participants in my study being really, really articulate, and also being, I need to be heard. I need my voice to be heard now. So I think that's a huge benefit in terms of understanding FASD, that it kind of, we talk about all the domains that it affects, in terms of your memory, your understanding, school and everything like that. But young people are fantastic at saying, this is the kind of support I think I need. Um, Sometimes when they're in that situation, they mightn't always request it. So I think it's kind of like a circle around the young person that we have to say, remember, or this is what you can use, and to remind them as well. And that it's okay to have it's okay to have any support. We all need different types of supports, regardless of our needs. So I suppose for me, that's one of the kind of really clear benefits, is giving a young person a voice. Um, to go to an appointment, to have a professional address them, discuss it with them, include them in their own decision making. I think from research, it tells us that um, as young people, they're actually entitled, obviously, to supports as they go into adulthood. So in terms of disability living allowance, supports at college, placements, whatever they're doing, they are entitled to that support, so they should be accessing it. So there's definite things that tell you out there, yes, once they know disability identity is a huge factor for them, and then once they're able to articulate for themselves, I think there's a sense, I suppose, more in the adults, what I probably, maybe externally as an observer, I see that more adults, when they're diagnosed, definitely have a voice on Twitter and social media, and they're very keen to explain what's going on for them and to link up to a much wider FASD community. Don't see that as such in the kind of younger ages, but so I definitely think lots of benefits out there for that. Sorry, that's a bit of a sprawling answer. Sorry, Barbara.
No, that's great. And I think it's raised a point to my mind as well, about there's a lot of barriers to diagnosis around, especially for adoptive families, in terms of accessing evidence around PAE and things like that. And I don't think I've considered a lot before about the impact that that's going to have on a young person's identity if they're not able to get that diagnosis that they maybe are entitled to. But it just opens up another thing to be thinking about, and another really valuable thing that will come from your research as well, about the benefits of getting to that point of diagnosis.
And I think there's such, so I was going to say, sometimes there's, when I've spoken to professionals in terms of, because I've had a few consultations following, webinars with other professionals looking at kind of diagnosis, and being part of a kind of interdisciplinary pilot that I was part of. And actually, some of the questions from health professionals was, how did the parents manage the news? What about the young people? Were they quite worried? And actually, what you tend to get from kind of the actual voices of parents and young people saying, we're okay, we just want to know what's going on. I want to know why I feel like this. Do you know what I mean? I feel different. So why do I feel different? That's why I feel different. It's not the kind of maybe the stereotype of, oh, my biological mother did this, and this. That didn't come up in any of my interviews where the children had any blame or anger or emotions. They stated a fact as if it was factual information, and then they moved on. So that's very kind of, I suppose that's kind of quite contrary to what public and professionals may perceive it to be for the young person.
Well, I think that's something we've come across quite a lot as well. We've got a question that, were the young people involved in your study, did they already have a diagnosis of FASD, or did someone not have an official diagnosis yet?
No, as part of my criteria, the criteria for the study, I asked for young people to be aged 12 and 19, living within the UK, and they had to have a diagnosis. And it could be fetal alcohol syndrome, because I know that was the older term, FASD, alcohol-related neurodevelopmental disorder, or neurodevelopmental disorder with PAE, any one of those, because we were going to talk about FASD. So I didn't obviously want to upset or traumatize anybody by introducing it. That would not be ethical. So really clear criteria that the young people had to be aware of their diagnosis in order to participate.
That's great, thanks. I just have a couple more questions. We'll be finishing in a few moments, but we've got a question. Would you be able to speak a wee bit about the role of an educational psychologist in the assessment process? What role do you play, if any?
Okay, so as I mentioned, I was involved in a multi-agency pilot with NHS at one point. And at that point, I was contributing to a much wider assessment process. So I was looking at their the information that I could gather around the young person, kind of their views, observations. I did some assessment with the young person, and then it came back to this multidisciplinary group where we would share all our assessment information, and then we would look at the diagnostic criteria. Now, that was the diagnostic formulation in itself. It was discussed by the group, but it was led by a pediatrician because they're the only person that could make that diagnosis. At present, what I tend to do, sorry, I'm going to get my glass of water now. Educational psychologists, we are quite a unique group. We vary in our practice of consultation, assessment, research, training and development. In Scotland, there's 26 local authorities. There's probably 26 different practices in that. So within my authority, I contribute to the identification of educational needs. So I very much practice within an educational setting. So if a young person has a diagnosis of FASD, I will kind of look at, well, provide support to the school in terms of identifying what their young person's needs might be. And we are gathering a sense of, the things that they're really good at, motivated by, their strengths in the curriculum, and kind of their approaches to learning. And then we're also looking at what areas of support they might need. So it might be kind of play, it might be social skills, it might be communication, it could be literacy. And then from that, we're kind of advising on adjustments for that. Sometimes if there is a number of other issues going on, I will do obviously kind of interdisciplinary work with kind of health as well, and contribute to that much wider, much more holistic picture in terms of the young person as well. So at the moment, I am actually currently involved in sorry, the title's in health or something else, sorry, an intellectual disability abbreviated assessment pathway. So not an FASD pathway, but an intellectual disability one. So it kind of mirrors the process that we did in FASD in terms of gathering, sharing all our information, but just really good interdisciplinary practice of sharing information, obviously with parents and children's consent, doing assessment where appropriate, gathering what information we already know, and making sure that we kind of come to a very clear formulation and outcome for the young person and family.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of mirrors two sets of work that I do.
You're definitely a very busy person.
I am. I work part-time. Yes, I work 2.5 days for the local authority as well. So that's keeping me busy.
We've had a few questions just around diagnosis, so I'm actually just going to do a wee bit of signposting around that, so we don't need to get into that too much. We've got somebody asking about the criteria for a diagnosis. It's quite complex to go into. There's a couple of different diagnoses depending whether there's facial features or not.
Yeah.
It's all about brain domains. So I've asked Simon to pop into the chat a link to the Sign 156 Parent and Carer Guide.
Yes.
Which is a really good resource for just learning more about the diagnostic pathway and what you should be asking and what to do. We'll also pop into the chat a link to the neurodevelopmental pathway, which has got lots of information about assessment and it's a huge big document. Get a big cup of coffee, sit down to read that one. But it's a really useful thing to.
I think that's a kind of a key thing. Parents having the information at hand, and also if you are kind of pursuing anything, just to have a really clear where you can find a prenatal alcohol exposure, because that's one of the main criteria in itself.
Mhm.
And just because, and also it's important to recognize that just because a child has that, it mightn't necessarily meet the diagnostic criteria either.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah,
It's
but
all
I mean,
kind
it
of
is
measured on
the
a
whole
scale.
process within that.
Yeah. If there's anybody here who's not connected into FASD Hub Scotland, you're very welcome to come and join our community. We can offer lots of support and advice and signposting around diagnosis, around parenting strategies, just being there, walking that journey a bit with you. We've got a big Facebook community of over 300 people who are all parents and carers of individuals with FASD. And Simon's popped into the chat there the link to join our Facebook group. If you click on the link, you'll be asked to join to fill in a membership form, or to give us your email address and we'll send you the form. Just we ask people to fill that in if you're going to join a group. We're also able to offer training and one-to-one support to parents and caregivers as well. We're really huge amount of support we can offer. So if you are looking at diagnosis, then please get in touch with us and we'd be happy to support you with that. I'm just going to quick check at the chat and see if there's anything else that we yeah. Oh, we'll also pop in a link to the FASD team. They have it's the Fetal Alcohol Advisory Support and Training Team, and they were formerly known as Ayrshire and Arran. And I think, Miranda, you were involved in writing some of their resources.
I contributed, yeah, I contributed to the educators resource.
Yeah. So
On
what
that as well.
educators need to know is a brilliant resource that we probably send out to families at least once a week.
Yeah.
In fact, we've sent hundreds of copies out. So we'll pop a link into the FAST team resources too, and you'll find lots of really useful things there. Just see if we've got any other questions before we bring things to a close. I know Miranda's children are keen to get back on the internet.
They should be in bed, actually.
They should be in bed.
They should be in bed.
We've got lots of really nice comments in there about how people are really looking forward to hearing the results of your research, and how lived experience is just so important that we capture, capture that lived experience. And not that it's just, not only that it's captured, but there's an audience for that as well, and that people listen and change happens.
Yeah. And I mean, I've been kind of periodically in contact with my kind of young people as well, but I mean, I honestly, I had amazing conversations, and I'm not just saying that as an, oh, they took part of my research, but they were just such great participants. They were willing to share, they were really receptive to my questions as well with it. So, and they were really wonderful insights to how they felt about it, and the kind of really clear voice that they expressed, that they had a really clear messages that they wanted to share. So I am indebted to them, because I mean, it's fantastic that they participated and they gave me their time. So I don't know if anybody knows the young people or if there's parents out there, but just a huge thanks to them as well.
Yeah, no, so it's just really exciting, and it fits really well into our theme for this year for the hub as well, which is FASD Hear Me, and we really want to get the voice of parents and carers, children and young people and professionals, and get the word out there about how amazing our individuals are, but how much they also need the right kind of support. We had a lot of questions around diagnosis that we weren't able to get to this evening. However, I'm delighted to be able to tell you that next month, for our Wednesday webinar on the 20th of April, we are going to have a member of the team from the Fetal Alcohol Advisory and Support and Training team. I'm sure their name gets longer every time I say it. We're going, and they are the group, they were the people formerly known as Ayrshire and Arran, and they are the people who support clinicians and everything to do around FASD. So they're going to be joining us next month, and we are having 2 webinars in April. We're also having one on the 6th of April, I believe. We haven't quite got the details up for that yet, but it's going to be all about a very exciting FASD roadshow that's going to be happening later in the year. And we're going to be letting you know how you can get involved in that. So to bring things to a close, feel free to get in touch with the Hub if anybody's got any questions at all. We're here to support you. And Miranda, thank you so much for giving up your Wednesday evening and for all the preparation put into tonight. We wish you all the best for your research, and we've had lots of lovely comments and people really excited to see what comes out of it. If there's anything that the Hub and all the people who are here tonight can do to support you in your research, please do let us know. But thank you very much for joining us tonight.
And thank you to the Hub, and thanks to all the parents and people who have kind of given up their time this evening as well. I'm popping in next Tuesday evening as well. Barbara, you'll keep me right on that.
Yeah, I know. So if you're a member of our peer support group, our Facebook peer support group, then every on the 2nd and 4th Tuesday of every month, we have a virtual peer support group meetup on Zoom. And Miranda's very kindly coming along to next Tuesday's group just to have a bit more chat around her research and just experiences of being in the FASD field and sharing some of her knowledge and experience in a much more kind of informal environment. You'll be able to see each other and have a good conversation. That'll be hosted by Rich and Gemma, who are 2 members of the Hub team. So if you want to access that chat, then make sure you join our Facebook group and you'll see the details of that in there. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming along this evening. I hope we found it enjoyable and very informative as well. And we hope to see you again next month. So thanks very much for joining us. Have a good night.